Everybody, this is Nahaz, and men lie, women lie, but stats don't lie. Welcome to episode 12. We're going to talk about the Manila Major Qualifiers, talk about this week's Epicenter event, and a historic achievement by Newbee that was set today. So here are your four Manila Major Qualifier winners. As we talked about in previous videos, with 12 teams directly invited, it's only one team coming out of each region this time. And in the Americas, that was Digital Chaos, who were able to prevail 3-0 in the grand final against Shazam. They went 14-2 in the tournament overall. The only two losses came in the winner's bracket final against Shazam, and they were notable for the variety of heroes that they picked throughout the tournament. In one of the panel segments that I did for this team, I pointed out that they had picked 23 different heroes within a stretch of 5 games. So this is a team that's very diverse in both their heroes and the strats that they won. The common denominator for them was that Wee was consistently excellent throughout the tournament. He had 647 average gold per minute, 593 average experience per minute. He was the only player across all 4 regions in the top 5 in both categories. Meanwhile, in China, I don't think anybody is surprised to see Newbee winning this event. I think some people will be surprised by the manner in which they did it. At 15-0, they were absolutely dominant. The only team across all 4 regions to not lose a game in the qualifiers. They had the #1 overall average team KDA. Chuan's Lion has been fantastic. They also picked that Lion 3 times in their wins in Epicenter play today. KP, their offlane player, was 5-0 on Doom and was really outstanding throughout the event. If I had to pick one player of the event, it's probably him. He had a 13.3 KDA as an offlaner, which was #1 out of all players at any position in all 4 of the regions. Those are really universe-like numbers, and he's an Australian player that actually played with MVP Hot 6 over at TI5, came over from SEA to play with Newbee in China, and has really excelled. I think he's going to do some great things going forward. And really, this Newbee team, if they continue to play the way they're playing right now, I do think that they will finish top 6 overall in the Manila Major itself. Meanwhile, over in EU, this was a little bit of a surprising result, not necessarily because Empire wouldn't have been the favorites coming in. They would have been among the favorites in the EU region, but because early on they really struggled in their group phase matches. I believe, if I'm remembering this right, they were only 1-3 on the first day of group play. Regardless, they do come back. They were able to win that EU qualifier, looking pretty impressive in their final playoff series. They picked Batrider 4 times in their final 9 playoff phase games. They were 4-0 on that hero, and really a lot of people talking about Mipashka as just an excellent 4-position player. He had the top assists per game average of any of the 16 teams that made the playoff phase across the 4 regions. And finally, Mineski, similar to Digital Chaos, they actually lost 2-1 against TNC in their winners bracket final. They went down, won the lower bracket final, and then came back to sweep the same team, TNC, 3-0 in the grand finals of the SEA qualifier. This prompted a little bit of talk, and I would tend to agree with this, that if Valve is going to stick with this only 1 team per qualifier region format, which I actually hope they don't. I think there should be fewer than 12 direct invites. That's another topic. But if they're going to stick with this format, I actually think that they should probably go to best of 5 single elimination playoff brackets rather than best of 3 double elimination with a best of 5 grand final. That would, #1, presumably that could cut some time off the total duration of the event. And just more importantly, in at least 2 of the 4 regions, these winners bracket final series just weren't particularly meaningful. In terms of individual players, Raging Potato from Mineski was #2 out of any player in the 4 regions in XPM. Played some very excellent games, particularly on that mid-Marana. Mineski will continue to be underdog teams as they go into the Manila Major, but this is a team that I think has the potential to at least catch some people off guard. When you look at the qualifier meta, so no surprise in terms of your top 4 heroes, Doom, Beastmaster, Bounty Hunter, Enchantress were the 4 most contested, that is most picked and banned across all 4 regions. All 4 of those heroes were very much contested in the latter half of 6.86 as well. Alchemist is a little bit new. A lot of teams, this hero is notable for his ban. He was banned 132 times across all 4 regions, behind only Bounty Hunter. If you look at all the heroes in the qualifiers, and it's pretty easy to see why. In the 29 matches that he did play, he averaged over 929 gold per minute. That was the top of any hero by over 100, and considering that's almost 30 games that he appeared in, that's just a huge advantage. Teams had a lot of problems dealing without. One concern that I did express when I did a couple of the panel segments was about the average match length. And if you look at this, if you compare the Manila qualifiers to the Shanghai qualifiers, this really bears out that apart from the US, where the average match time was actually a little bit shorter, about a minute and 30 seconds or so shorter, in all of the other three regions, and this to me is just reflects the fact that the field in the in the Americas qualifiers this time was just not very well balanced. There was a reason that both open qualifier teams made it into the playoff phase in that American regions, but in all three of the other regions, he had between a 3 and a 5 minute increase in average match time. So EU and SEA average match time increased by just around 5 minutes, which is substantial. And then China, it increased by about 3.5 minutes. So we are definitely getting longer games in the early days of 6.86. It's worth noting, as we're going to start to look at 6.87C, which was released right after the qualifiers ended, that 6 out of the top 11 most contested heroes were nerfed, at least in some way, in the new sub-patch that got released. So this was something that I actually called in one of the last panel segments that I did in LA. I said that I thought Infernal Blade would get a nerf, which it did. Doom's Infernal Blade went down from 40 base damage to 25 at level 1, scaling upward to 40 at level 4. I said I thought that Beastmaster's Boar would get nerfed. This was a little bit, this actually ended up being a little bit different than I expected. They removed the Beastmaster Boar poison going through spell immunity. I actually thought that they would nerf the damage on the Boar overall, and the reason for that is because despite Beastmaster being nerfed on paper in 6.87, so the Hawk vision radius was reduced in the current patch, which was obviously a big reason why teams were valuing this hero. But if you looked under the hood, if you looked at the damage type changes, all right? So there was a thread on Reddit that came out just after the patch was released, pointing out that as a result of the damage type changes, Venomancer's wards would actually end up doing a lot more damage to neutral creeps in the jungle. The same is actually true of Beastmaster's Boar. Beastmaster's Boar dealt that piercing damage type, same damage type as Venomancer wards. So Beastmaster can actually jungle quite a bit more efficiently in the early game than he could in the previous patch. And remember, FY and Vici Gaming Reborn ran Beastmaster Jungle very, very effectively at Starladder even in the previous patch. So this ends up, I actually believe that the hero was net buffed going into 6.87 despite being one of the stronger heroes in the previous patch. So I would expect that Beastmaster would actually get another mini nerf in 6.87D, which will probably come out before Manila. The most significant individual hero change, though, was the nerf to Alchemist Illusions. They no longer benefit from Grievel's Greed. And I think that that's probably that's a very reasonable change given the level of farm that Beastmaster was able to sustain, as we saw on the previous slide. The other change that is in relation to this match time problem that I was thinking about during the quals was gold dynamics were changed. So AoE gold bounties were reduced from 87644 per enemy hero level to 65433. So 3 gold per enemy hero level. 2 gold per enemy hero level with 1, 2, or 3 heroes participating in the kill, and then 1 gold per level with 4 or 5 heroes participating in the kill. So if you look at this, just kind of do a case scenario. Let's suppose that 3 heroes on your team kill one level 20 hero on the enemy team. So this is kind of like a late game 3 hero rotation to get a single pickoff gank. All right. That's going to be, when you add it up across all three heroes, that's going to be 120 less total base gold awarded in AoE bounties. And this is potentially very significant because remember, the way that AoE kill bounties work is they take that base gold bounty and then they scale it up depending on whether both your team and your individual hero are ahead of or behind relative to the enemy team. So this is 120 less base gold, but that amount can be up to doubled depending on whether or not you are behind the enemy team. If you work it out, if you just consider the base gold and you look at all three components, so there's a base component, there's a hero level component, and then there's a net worth component of the enemy hero that you killed. If you add that up, the reduction of 120 less total base gold is almost a 20% total bounty reduction. So this is a significant change, but it's not huge in and of itself. The super creep bounty gold, I include this in the discussion only because I think it's more evidence of Ice Frog and the team thinking specifically about how do we prevent more of these games from just dragging on and on. The change itself ends up being fairly small in isolation. The way it works is if you take, let's say you take a full set of racks as one melee and one range racks in the same lane just before 30 minutes. You're now, by the time 60 minutes rolls around, going to be making about 24 gold less per creep wave. That's when you look at super creep bounties, that's right around one creep, maybe a little bit less. So it's not a huge change, but again, it's designed, or it's implemented with an eye toward reducing the propensity of these games to drag on. There were also, as we talked about on the previous slide, some of the other heroes that were very hotly contested in the qualifiers. Vengeful Spirit got a moderate nerf. This is on the back of a change in 6.87 itself that decreased the stun duration on low levels of her magic missile. Her starting intelligence and intelligence gain were both further reduced in 6.87C. So not only is magic missile stunning for a bit less, but she's going to be able to throw it out less often as she rotates around the map in the early game. There were also very minor nerfs. Slaughter got his movement speed reduced, and Bounty Hunter got his Janata slow reduced yet again, but these are fairly minor in comparison. So just to go back a little bit, I want to at least talk about my thoughts on gold bounties, why I'm concerned about this mechanic, and why I think that this mechanic leads not only to longer matches, but potentially to more boring matches as well. And the reason I'm doing this, I found when I was talking about this at the Hub that I was citing this article that I wrote like almost 2 years ago now, right before 6.82 was released in the wake of TI4. Obviously, it's been a while, so I wanted to refresh people's memories. Why was I against this mechanic when it was originally introduced? There's a concept in economics that we teach our students called endogeneity. Endogeneity is basically that policy changes have both direct and indirect effects. So the story that we tell our students is that in economics, our data aren't collected in a laboratory under controlled conditions. You are going to have direct effects of a policy change, but you're also going to have to consider that economic agents will change their behavior and their decision making as a result of policy changes, and thus there may be indirect effects as well. So the example that I use in a number of my classes is from a paper by Mike Conlon and his wife Stacy Dickert Conlon. There's actually one other author on this paper whose name I can never remember. Sorry about that. But they looked at a set of counties in Texas from the late 70s to the early 90s. And what they were looking at is, in that period of time, a number of counties in this area in Texas introduced harsher laws and harsher enforcement on alcohol offenses for people that were right around 21 or just a little bit younger. And this was intended to decrease arrests for DUI and other minor related alcohol offenses. And what the authors found was that, yes, those kinds of arrests may have decreased. Alcohol related arrests for juveniles may have decreased in those counties, but the total arrests didn't necessarily go down, and that was because in the counties that started to be stricter on alcohol, you started to see an increase in the rate of arrests for illicit drug-related offenses. So this is an example of the kind of indirect effect that policy designed to combat alcohol abuse by juveniles or minors actually saw with it an increase as people substituted from alcohol to other types of drugs. All right. So why is there a parallel? Obviously, it seems like this is a huge stretch. Why is there a parallel between this and AoE gold bounties? Well, When AoE gold bounties were introduced, the most important aspect, and this remains true, is that they're a comeback mechanic. These bounties scale, they increase when your team is behind in total net worth relative to the other team. And since then, in fact, there's another mechanic that's been introduced. They also actually increase or decrease depending on whether your individual hero is more or less farmed relative to other heroes in the game. But the important thing to remember is that these are a comeback mechanic. They're larger for teams that are behind. Teams that are behind get more out of kills than teams that are ahead. When these were first introduced, I pointed out that you were going to see longer games because comebacks were going to be more likely. Fine. A lot of people said, all right, you're probably right about that, but these longer games should be more action-packed because you're increasing the total reward to teams that get kills. You're getting more gold out of kills, especially relative to some of the creep changes that have happened since, where you're now getting more gold out of kills, especially relative to the gold that you get from farming creeps. So we want more action-packed games. What I pointed out at the time was that there was a potential for an indirect effect because teams, especially with the bounties as they were in 6.82, they were much, much larger. Teams were going to have the incentive to play much more cautiously when they were ahead. And indeed, what we actually saw, if you compare the last 300 games of 6.81 to around the first 300 games of 6.82, was in fact kills per minute actually decreased in pro matches. You saw teams playing much more carefully when they were ahead. Now, why is this a concern going into 6.87? We've obviously had several patches come out in the interim. Well, as a partial response to the fact that matches were getting longer, high ground was rebalanced in 6.84. And the way in which they rebalanced high ground, rather than changing the risk, because breaking high ground, of course, is hard in Dota 2, what IceFrog did and the team did in 6.84 was they increased the reward, okay? So as a partial response to these games drawing out, and a lot of this was happening. A lot of the comeback gold was being awarded off of failed high ground pushes. So as a partial response to these games drawing out, 6.84 increased the total bounties of your team from taking a lane of racks by just over 1k gold, all right, and reduced tier 3 armor by 3. So they made it just a little bit easier to push high ground, but more importantly, they increased the reward of doing so. 6.87 is the first time since then that we've seen high ground get rebalanced. 6.87 shifted tier 3 towers back farther from the ramp, so these chip strategies like Death Prophet standing at the base of your tower using Exorcism, they're now more dangerous for the offensive team, and it introduced an AoE armor aura that adds 3 armor to heroes and creeps within a radius of these tier 2 and tier 3 towers. So high ground for the first time in quite a while has actually been made harder to push. And I worry that there was actually some relatively nice articles recently. There was one in particular that I think it's worth a read on Liquid, on teamliquid.com, that talks about the fact that these comeback mechanics were very, very important in deciding some of the matches at the Starladder Invitation in particular. So Vici Gaming Reborn really were able to exploit some of those mechanics in matches where Mikashka, their stand-in, lost his lane pretty hard as Queen of Pain, but then was able to come back by getting kills in the mid and the late game. This, because a lot of those gold bounties, those comeback gold bounties, are awarded off the back of failed high ground pushes, this was a concern to me, and I think that was the main reason that IceFrog and the team slightly decreased those AoE gold bounties in 6.87c. I'm not sure that this is enough of a decrease to fully offset some of the changes, but we're going to see. All of this, of course, is theory crafting at this point, but this is just to explain some of the concerns that I expressed during several of the panel segments at the Manila Qualifiers Hub. So we should talk about Newbee's remarkable run here. Newbee, with its first 4 wins, they won their way into the main field at the EPICENTER event today. They now have 25 straight wins in Pro Dota 2 matches. This is an all-time record. The previous win streak record was 24 games that was set in June 2013 by Navi. And I think this is a remarkable record. A lot of critics are very quick to point out that most of these matches were regional Finals. So H Cup, where they began the streak, is obviously a regional cup. And then, of course, the Manila Qualifiers were in the Chinese region. If you actually look, these were against really good teams. The Chinese region, I personally feel like if you had put LGD that was directly invited into that bracket in the Chinese qualifier, I don't think they would have won. I think they would have lost to Newbee, and I think they might well have lost to eHome as well as a couple other teams. Remember, CDEC Youth actually took a best-of-3 series from eHome in the playoff bracket. So I think there are a lot of good teams in that region. This is, to me, an incredibly impressive streak. The next one down from it was Alliance at TI3 that was actually ended by Burning's Anti-Mage. So there's a lot of history here, just a historic streak that reflects the way that they've been playing lately. And Knoxville also noticed this morning, he tweeted out that if you look at the best 50-game record, so if you look at the best record that any team has ever posted in a contiguous 50-game block, Newbee's 45-5 record over their current last 50 games matches the all-time best set by Alliance around TI3. So this team is playing extraordinarily well. I would not be surprised to see them come top 4 in Epicenter. I wouldn't be surprised to see them top 6 at the Manila Major itself. So let's talk a little bit about Epicenter. At the time I'm recording this No Diggity versus Complexity series is just wrapping up. The winner of that series will earn its way into the field here. They'll play Liquid in the opening best-of-3 series. I believe this is tomorrow in Group A. These groups are being played in GSL format, so these are double elimination with the top 2 teams advancing, and then the remaining 4 out of 8 teams will play a double elimination playoffs with cross-group seeding. So, for example, number 2 team in Group A coming out of that group phase plays the number 1 team in Group B, and vice versa. All of these series will be best-of-3, and there'll be a best-of-5 grand finals. My picks, for whatever it's worth, I think Liquid is playing extraordinarily well recently. I know they're practicing pretty hard. Their scrims are going pretty well. I expect them to win the event. I do think this may be a little bit of my bias, but I do think that EG is going to come in second here. I think actually the question on my mind is whether Newbee is going to be able to knock off Secret. I'm going to go ahead and pick them too because I think Newbee has just had a lot of matches recently. They're in top form. Secret looked a little bit rusty to me the last time we saw them in action. I do think Secret ultimately are probably going to be a top 4 team at Manila, but it's going to take them some time to get there. So I do think Newbee are going to be able to take a top 2 spot in Group B. Again, that's a very high risk pick. I wouldn't recommend putting your rares on that. And I do think OG are going to be the other team besides Liquid that come out of Group A. But again, when you look at these LAN events recently, with MVP taking home both Dota Pit and then the last big LAN previous to this one, and a WePlay, and then you see Wings reigning in ESL 1 Manila. Anything can happen at these events, guys. This is an era of unrivaled parity that we're experiencing right now in Pro Dota 2. I would not be surprised to see any of these teams make some noise. So with that said, shout out to Red Eye. He is back hosting the panels at Epicenter. It's been a great pleasure listening to him again. He actually has a new emote on his Twitch channel that is my face, so you guys can check that out if you want to. But it's good to see Paul back in Dota 2 where he belongs. And that is all for now. This is Nahaz, and I will talk to you guys soon.